Welcome, Josh, to the Happier at Work podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have you as my guest today. Do you want to introduce yourself to listeners and give them a bit of a sense of who you are, what you do, and how you got to where you are?
Eva, hi. Thanks so much for having me. Yes, I'm Josh Secrest. I'm the vice president of marketing and client advocacy at a company called Paradox. Paradox is hiring technology. We get to partner with clients like Amazon, McDonald's, Nestle, Unilever, Lowe's, and really take their hiring process from start to finish. Our goal, though, is to have hiring technology that allows for our clients to spend more time with people and not technology. So we'll kind of get into a little bit of Paradox as we move through, but my background has been a long time HR leader. Have gotten to sit in basically every seat within HR, maybe except for comp and benefits. Spent a good chunk of time at Abercrombie and Fitch in TA and culture roles, and then prior to coming to Paradox, was the head of global talent attraction and acquisition and strategy at McDonald's. So got to
Mm,
think about hiring and happiness at work for over 37,000 restaurants, over 2
wow.
million employees in 120 countries. So kind of I'm passionate about talent. I'm passionate about recruitment. And that was kind of like the Super Bowl for me. So now it's neat to be able to advise some other big clients and find ways to help them solve challenges.
Yeah, brilliant. Love that. And two very well known brands there. And interesting what you're saying about McDonald's. I mean, the thing that springs to my mind is the challenge that it's 120 different countries and dealing with different cultures, and maybe there's different practices, and never mind all of the legalities around the different hiring practices and employment legislation as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good learning. I'm sure for all of us in the business world, right? You go from your first job where you kind of become this expert. You know all the people,
Yeah,
you know your way around. You kind of have a cheat code. McDonald's was then this like big jump of scale and complexity. I mean,
yeah,
yes, all restaurants are serving burgers and fries, but to your point, doing the human and people side of that
mm,
across 120 countries gets really complex. And we have a huge franchise organization. Over 90%
yes,
of
yeah,
McDonald's are franchise. So, and those are amazing business owner operators, that business leaders that you want to listen to. So, anyways, a lot of listening in that role before sort of designing. And my head always wants to go to designing and brainstorming, especially on the people side, because for a business like that, we were able to directly tie, this is, I think, a fun anecdote, but we were able to directly tie understaffed restaurants to also lower performing restaurants, right? So you kind of
okay,
think of that vicious cycle of if
yeah,
your business is understaffed, then the remaining staff probably gets spread pretty thin,
yeah,
and your managers are trying to plug holes everywhere. And so then there's higher turnover as a result of that.
yeah,
And then your customers probably aren't getting as good of an experience. You're not servicing as many of them
yeah,
within a minute or within an hour. And
yeah,
so then your revenue or your store hours get impacted. So, anyways, it was this big business challenge, but it took a lot of listening to be able to ensure that how you're addressing this business challenge, you're really taking care of the people and thinking about it in a warm way, and listening to kind of all the stakeholders, to your point,
yeah.
in multiple different countries and
Yeah.
multiple different scenarios with multiple different challenges.
Yeah, I love that actually. Yeah, just this whole idea. I mean, listening is really, really important skill in business in general, I think. But I love this idea rather than just thinking, I have this brilliant program and now I'm going to roll it out to all these um different businesses or all of these different countries and it's going to be the solution to everything. It's about listening and a really, really important and powerful um anecdote that you shared as well there, Josh, in relation to using data to solve problems. So having a look at, well, is there a correlation here between these two things? Okay, so we've noticed that this is what's happening now, and then going to probably to individual restaurants, it might be difficult, but at least groups of restaurants together to say this is an issue. Now, if we're to solve that, then why don't you tell us how to solve for that problem, or how can we support you to solve that, as opposed to just saying, oh, here's the solution. So I love that approach.
Yeah, in what you hear there through that listening, and I think it's where this podcast, I just brings me joy, is like, there was a very, obviously I work for a tech company. I love what some of the advancements in tech can be, but within this, it was kind of this very human component, which is, if you're in a McDonald's, right? And I think this just echoes in a lot of different places. If you're
I
a
think
restaurant manager,
we could probably say that 100% of listeners has experienced McDonald's at some point in their life. And if I think, I'm going back to my market research days when we're looking at things like penetration. So that's market penetration. So looking in any given year, what percentage of people, and I remember that there was always this funny percentage on toilet paper. I think it was something like 97 or 98%, which means that 2% of households, this is when I lived in the UK, 2% of households or 3% of households are not buying toilet paper in a given year. And, I always just thought it was like, what if that's quite unusual? You would think it would be 100%, but it's not 100%. And what are they doing? Let's not think about that. But you just kind of assume these things. But for the sake of this podcast, let's assume it's probably 100% of people listening have tried McDonald's at some point in their life.
Yeah, or been that manager, because right, you get really quickly out of the we have to hire 2 million people per year, and very much into a single restaurant sitting across from a single restaurant manager. Yeah. And it starts becoming really this human experience. Like, hey, what happens when you're understaffed? Oh my gosh, I already have 12 things to do. Now I have 15 things to do. That is hard. I want to run a really great business. I want to deliver amazing customer results. But now I went from having 12 things to having 15 things. And I think we all kind of experience that if we're managers and we go down a head count. You end up kind of having this moment where you're like, I was already doing a lot and now it's more. And for that, I mean, it was really helpful because you stopped looking at this problem as just this behemoth, and you started looking at it as like, how do you help a specific restaurant manager and then potentially scale that? And for us, and this is where I got interested in like where the interplay of technology and bringing kind of happiness and in humanity to work even at scale, even like at McDonald's, because really the solution there was like, oh, during these times you actually need to give hiring managers time back. Like, they don't need more process. They don't need lots of new things and stuff to learn. It's, this is a great deployment of maybe some automation, because where we want those people and where they want to be is helping their customers, helping run a great store, a great restaurant, helping onboard and train new people. And it kind of kept them in this space of really, really doing kind of the critical components of their work. And so that resulted in us kind of looking at ways to automate that part of the process. And that's actually how I ended up at Paradox, because we were able to partner with Paradox.
Yeah. So I'll come on to that in a minute, but I suppose I just wanted to reiterate this point of, it's not looking at it as exactly as you said, Josh, the behemoth challenge of hiring 2 million people in a year. It's bringing it back down to one step at a time, and what's this problem and how do we then solve this problem at scale. I loved your use of the word humanity, and it's about being human at work and bringing the human back into work. I'm a huge believer, a huge advocate of that. And before we go further, I'd love to know more, in your words, of what does Paradox actually do, and then maybe we can talk about automation and and taking away the kind of menial tasks to be able to put the humanity back at work.
Yeah, well, and I'll get to the Paradox piece, but I think it's just playing off of that point. Sometimes we think about problems in a really, it helps to think about it in the biggest possible way. Our brains can do that well. And then sometimes, and in this example, it was really helpful thinking about it, right? And maybe not the smallest possible way, but getting really into the specifics, getting into a specific restaurant. And that's, I think, showcased by even just some numbers. So, if a McDonald's, even if we were seeing, 10, 20 million applications come through, if you actually divide that by 37,000 restaurants and divide that by 365 days per year, what you were finding was our restaurants were chronically still understaffed, but even though that seems like a lot, if you look
Yeah.
at it at the big level, that's a lot. How do you process that? At
Yeah.
the smaller scale, that's actually like one, you all can check me on my math, but about like 1.5,
Okay. Yeah.
applicants
Yeah.
per day,
Yeah. I'm
right?
not going
And
to
so
do
that's
that
kind of
maths
where
right now.
so
I'll
I'm going to
trust you.
probably get something on LinkedIn on that I botched it in some way. But so that's really interesting on like enter Paradox, which is a hiring technology that is conversational, which means that it really looks like text-based, so mobile-first texting. So if you go
Yeah.
into a restaurant, or if you're see on Indeed, a short code or a QR code or chat functionality on a website, it allows for you without any passcodes or logins or filling out forms to apply to a job in essentially a text-based conversation. So you don't have to
Okay.
download any apps. And it actually takes you all the way through. You can answer the questions, so you get screened through conversation. If you then get qualified, you automatically move to getting scheduled. This is all happening on your mobile device. Can even take an interview through that, get your offer, all through that. So no logging in, no waiting, and it makes the experience super easy.
Yeah.
Removes a lot of the friction points. So I mean, a lot of the things I'm kind of calling out with, if you've applied for a job recently, are sometimes frustrating. It's a 20-minute application. You're asked to fill out multiple things, duplicate times.
Don't get me
And so
started,
this
Josh.
was
The upload your resume here, and then also can you fill out all of this additional detail, which in brackets, which is also contained in your resume, which is what people are thinking they find frustrating. And I know there's certain platforms that do that, and I'm not going to mention them on here, but yeah, like that sounds much easier, and exactly as you say, it takes the friction away from what it is that you're trying to do.
And that's a key part of it, and I think we all look for this in like any consumer experiences. It's
Yeah.
just that for some reason, for the last long time, and I think HR is finally catching up, or when we have to apply to a job, it's always been kind of 10 or 15 years behind, and it's finally caught up. So
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
everybody wants simple and frictionless. Nobody wants frustration, right? So everybody
No.
wants frictionless. And then where technology's gone, and what I think Paradox is wonderful at, is providing warmth through personalization. So you talk
Okay.
about millions of applicants, or even if it's 10 applicants, everybody able to ask the questions and get the answers they need 24/7, apply in whatever language they'd want to. It's got multilingual capabilities, the ability to not have to have a computer at home to be able to apply. So it ends up being fast and simple, but then creates this ability to have kind of warm, personalized experience for every individual, even if you're doing this at scale. And so you tie that into McDonald's, and why that was such a like wonderful feature for us is, you have this restaurant that's chronically understaffed, and you've got that manager that's working hard to kind of keep that restaurant afloat. And so the automation helps that manager, get, we were getting 4 to 5 hours back per week. So that's amazing.
Oh wow.
But then
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
also allowing those candidates that are coming, that 1.5 candidates that's coming in per day, for that restaurant to be the first one to get back to them, to make sure that their experience, that they're coming in for an interview, to make sure that their experience is great. And so you not only saw more than applications coming in because it was an easier process that was really fast, but then you were also seeing people who really wanted to, this is where they wanted to work. They had all their questions answered, and started to see less turnover in the short term as well.
Yeah. What I was going to say, another one of the frustrations I think that happens is that you apply for a job and your resume, your CV goes into a black hole somewhere. And maybe you get a response in 4 weeks, maybe you get no response at all, and you don't really know where it's gone or what's happened. But if you can process that, or if you can move someone to the next stage a lot more quickly, through using technology rather than having to kind of wait all of that time, I think that reduces the friction. And I'm thinking from the candidate's perspective as well, if they're applying for a lot of jobs, and like you say, in that case, McDonald's is the first to reply, then it's it makes it then the kind of number one, and of the experience that they've had in terms of the I'm not going to say the onboarding, it's like, I guess, the pre-screening stage, which is an important part of the impression you get of an organization before you join it.
Yeah, the data says that um, people apply to typically 12 jobs
Okay,
around the
yeah,
same time.
yeah,
And so, I mean, that's really interesting. If you can be the first to get back and
yeah,
start communicating there, I think then it does give you an advantage to be able to move through. Um, yeah, I think it just keeps going back to this. How do you make these processes at work, hiring, but even more broadly, really simple, really intuitive, match more of the technology that is in our personal lives. We all have the either Google or Alexas around the house,
yeah,
or how dependent we are on Siri. And then sometimes like work technology just like has lagged. And I think we're starting to get to this place where, the Slacks and Paradoxes and Murals of the world are starting to be these really enjoyable, easy, intuitive, commercial grade tech that's entering our
yeah,
work lives, which makes work fun and enjoyable
yeah,
and,
yeah,
and
yeah.
just easy because it's a natural fit.
But it helps us to get the work done as well from a productivity perspective, and from an organization perspective, just trying to organize things in such a way that you'll get more done and automate things. I know certainly in my own business I've automated, the podcast is kind of a case in point. Everything is streamlined, the emails are all templated, there's automated reminders that go out, all of that kind of stuff. And it's my little pride and joy. I love that everything's so kind of, it's all, there's no, it's leaving me free to do the stuff that's important to me, and having more of that human connection, as opposed to having to do the menial things of sending reminders and picking dates and
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. It's all done for me already. The other question I kind of had around this is, given the type, and given that you're talking about it from a McDonald's perspective, and that's kind of how you got into Paradox, what kind of organizations can use this technology? Is it more the type of high volume type of recruitment, or can it be used at any level? Or talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a really nice tie into what you were talking about around automation, because I think
Mm,
you probably hear automation and a couple things can come to mind. One is just like, oh my gosh,
the
is
robots are
automation
taking
taking
over.
over? Yeah.
Yeah,
And I like how we're talking about this, because I think it's like what I'm so passionate about is this, where does automation make sense? Where does
yeah,
that make sense at work? Where does that make sense in the hiring process? Um, and in the hiring process, it's a really great activity to go through, right? Like someone applies and gets screened. Oh, well, I actually want that to be consistent 100% of the time from a reducing bias. I want
yeah,
that to happen.
yes, yeah, yeah,
Selecting based on core criteria so that you have someone's name or address or something like that isn't ever even considered.
yeah, yeah,
That's going to help. Being able to answer questions that feel uh, like personalized, that's something that I'm open to being automated. And for McDonald's, one of the things that we said wasn't going to be automated ever was the in-person, like the interview, right?
yes, yeah, yeah,
That in sometimes during COVID needed to be virtual or video, but like our managers and our franchisees were really eager to make sure that there was still that, like, come into the restaurant, just make sure it's right for you. Let's meet each other. And there's that component, so that was a piece where that wasn't going to be automated. And so when you kind of talk about like, oh, well, then, Paradox as this conversational way to apply and hire that automates, I usually talk about it as can be anywhere from 90 to 100% of the experience. The industries that we support, they're pretty far reaching, but I'll kind of talk about it in three different ways.
yeah,
One would be a customer facing, maybe it's a high volume recruiting scenario. So
yeah,
McDonald's is a perfect example. But a Lowe's or a retailer, I think kind of falls in this, a grocery store, hotel falls kind of similar here. You're probably going to automate 90% of the process, screening, scheduling, Q&A, but then you're going to have an interview, so that interview, you're armed with information and you can really connect. You can probably sell the job a little bit. You can talk about, answer the questions that are unique to them.
Yeah.
You then have some industries, maybe it's warehouses, distribution, wholesale, where, it's kind of the Amazons maybe of the world. And for that, the need is really, really great. And so you see a lot of them automate potentially 100% of the experience so that they can spend time at training and onboarding. And so they hire really fast, but then a lot of effort is getting that person in, and they have just amazing, onboarding and training programs. And then the last is maybe for a lot of listeners, kind of your corporate roles. And so this is where, Unilever and Nestle, it's really fun to be able to see all the great ideas that they have. Procter and Gamble, but it's almost a way to supercharge your recruiter, right? Your recruiter is so valuable within the organization. How do you give that recruiter almost like an Iron Man suit? Like, how do you supercharge their powers? And as I ran corporate recruiting teams, and our CEO talked about this a lot. He did the same. What would drive us crazy is you have this team of recruiters and their heads down in their computers instead of talking to candidates and giving out offers. And so for us, it was, how do you design software so that scheduling's taken off their plate, some of this initial screening's taken off their plate, communications are off their plate, so that they can really kind of focus on some of that sourcing, some of the interviewing, and making sure that those rock star candidates become employees for the organization. So in that scenario, it's probably 60 to 70% that's automated, and it's kind of supercharging your recruiters.
That makes total sense, and it goes back to your earlier point, Josh, of this idea of it's kind of putting the human back in. So, and I suppose in my head I can relate it to the podcast. So I can spend time sourcing guests, so I can spend time on other aspects of my business that are kind of that are important in terms of my business growth. And it just takes away, that the scheduling, the screening, and then the communications for me is templated, it's automated, and it's outsourced at the moment as well, all of that, the other stuff. So you can't automate everything. I haven't got to the stage where I'm using an AI to communicate with potential podcast guests yet, but maybe that is the future as well. But I can totally relate to it. I was going to say I've never worked in a recruitment role, but I actually have. I did. I worked in Perth for a time doing high volume recruitment, and my recollection of that is, we had 3 different systems that we were using. I think we had an Excel spreadsheet, we had an internal system, and then we had an external system that we needed to input data into. So it was very cumbersome, very repetitive. And was there enough time talking to candidates? We were recruiting for blue collar workers like painters and scaffolders to go and work in the mines in the Pilbara in Australia, in Western Australia. So it was, a huge learning curve for me, but massively interesting. And I think something like that could really, really benefit from the type of technology that you're talking about, so that you're taking a lot of what we would previously have had to do manually, and you're taking it away from us essentially. So we can focus.
And I like that sometimes that frame for technology. There may be an instance in your life or your work where, like, having fully automated or almost like robotics, that type of stuff makes sense. I like this technology that's assistive. Like, what would you do if you had an assistant? And wherever that challenge, or whether that's a worker at home, right? Like, what's the thing that if you could take that off your plate, you'd be more productive
Mm.
and happier. And hiring in HR tends to be this application of like, oh my gosh, we all want these like human to human components. Like we want to listen to each other, we want to help each other, we want to like make sure that this is right. It's just doing that at scale is hard. So
Yeah.
being able to automate some of those components, it's so interesting to see where then companies use that time back, again, back into, if it's training or if it's something else. And
Well,
to your point, even if you didn't sit in the seat of a recruiter, probably a lot of us have hired at some point, and sometimes the frustration of that process isn't too dissimilar from that McDonald's manager we were talking about, which is like, you really need somebody. This is something that's so important. Like if you hire the right person, your life is going to be easier. The results are going to be better. Like you can take more pride in your work. Like, the stakes, but for some reason that process can be clunky and frustrating. And you've taken on 3 or 4 more things and you're swamped. And so a clunky process may lead to poor decisions, less time, even for this really important topic of hiring. And so being able to remedy some of that stuff to make it faster, make it easier for hiring managers, just felt really important for our clients who are saying like, hey, we win, certainly based on the products we sell, but the people who are coming up with the ideas and the people who are teaming up to make our companies exceptional. So like, how do you make sure that we're all spending the right time there versus like fighting off a clunky and cumbersome process that should be
yes.
one of the most important,
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
a
No, it's so
company.
interesting, and I think like I love your description of it's assistive technology. And I suppose I want to put it out there. We won't spend too much time talking about this, but I think sometimes the perception of things becoming automated and the existence of technology means that there'll be fewer jobs or there'll be less work for people to do. But for me, that it's kind of the opposite. It's creating more happiness at work, more joy at work, because we're taking the kind of menial tasks away from people and putting the human back into what we are actually doing at work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of these repetitive administrative tasks,
Hmm.
which I don't think most would define as like those are the things that like get us up in the morning.
Yeah.
It's the creative, or it's the interaction, or it's the new. Um, and sometimes it's the feeling, right? It's the feeling cared for and appreciated,
Yeah.
which sometimes just needs time. Like I think
Yes.
we've all been in situations too where I'm sure you've talked about this a bunch on your podcast, but like the role of manager and leader and
Yeah.
boss
Yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
happiness. And, I think there are a lot of wonderful humans who sometimes aren't the best bosses because of stress and lack of time to be able
Yeah.
to, kind of dedicate there. And so again, if you can provide some of this assistive, you know, um, whether it's technology or otherwise, to be able to take some of that work off, then you see that time being dedicated in very human ways. You get back creativity, helping
Mm.
others, training others,
Yeah.
um, responding to customers, observing your surroundings, to make the right decisions. Those things are really important for all of us to drive our business. And so frankly, it's really important to our CEOs and CFOs and COOs. And I think more clearly over the last couple of years, there's been more of a direct line, which has been so neat to see. I think some of the leading like HR talent and leading organizations really start to talk about this, like engagement at work, happiness at work, retention at work,
Yeah.
because they feel good and right, and for all of us, proud to be at a company that
Yeah.
that thinks about those things. But then from a business side, from like a pure maybe dollars and cents, I mean, it's good for business.
Yeah.
It's more productive people coming up with more brilliant ideas
Yeah.
and wanting to stay and contribute and give
Yeah.
energy to
Better
this thing,
innovation
and we're
and
excited.
saving money in through retention rather than having to hire people
Mm-hmm.
again, rather than having a high attrition rate and people leaving and then you having to replace them. And data shows that I see differences between 30 and 200% of a person's salary in order to replace them you know, because
Wow. Yeah.
training, because of gaps in the team, because of relationships they've built, and recruitment costs, and all of those kind of things. So it's more important, I think, to hold on to the people that you have than to try and recruit new ones. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So kind of doing the, you know, getting the right people in the first place, and then holding on to them essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
It
the other thing that you talked about is this important topic of hiring, and like I'd love to get your thoughts with your background, Josh, on talent kind of in general, and when you're hiring someone, what are the kinds of things that you're thinking about, and you know, how do you make sure that you do hire those right people into the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question because each organization should have potentially a slightly different approach. So I mean,
Mm,
one would be, you know, setting up a process that feels really fair and inclusive for
yeah.
anyone that's coming in. And so this is a really a neat frame at McDonald's, which was how are we being evaluated by those who don't get a job here? So they've applied and they don't get a job. Have we been able to provide them with a really good and warm, fair experience? And I thought that was just like a
Yeah.
cool metric that I will like
Yeah.
take with me for life, of just like, all right, first baseline, I want to uh, build respect for my organization by giving it to every individual who applies or considers our organization. I think that's just like human, good for business, and I think sets a tone for the full organization. I then think it sometimes can come into the role, you know, how we're looking at hiring someone in a McDonald's or an Abercrombie distribution center or a retail store was going to be different than how we're hiring the next great Abercrombie designer or
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
the head of marketing, right, for McDonald's. But so I'll kind of focus this one maybe more on the professional and corporate side, which is I love being able to ask largely behavioral questions.
Yes. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know, give me a time when, and so that they can really account not just their resume. I've seen their resume,
Yeah.
um, but talk to me about the decisions they made, why they made them, um, and those questions should be tied to a lot of the culture and values and what makes someone successful. You know, essentially, they should be structured in a way that almost no one can tell you what you want to hear. It's anecdotes from their own life. The other piece that I think is increasing in popularity and in practice is that ability to do some sort of like either skills-based questions or skills-based like I don't know if I'd call them tests, but actually just like seeing some work get done. You know, I think within Paradox, I think one of the really neat pieces is there are a lot of positions that may have you know, projects tied to the interview process, and I
Okay.
think
Yeah.
that opens up a lot of opportunity for talent to kind of shine in the ways that you need to make sure that it's coming through within that process. So
Mm.
really good structured behavioral interviews on a you know, a fair and inclusive simple process, that if the role is right, doing a little bit of kind of project based or like skills based assessment.
Yeah. No, I love that, and again, totally agree. I love this idea of being evaluated by people who didn't actually get hired. And I guess, you know, I guess you're going to Glassdoor to see that, so people can, even if they've interviewed with somewhere, that they can say what their experience was of being interviewed there, and like you say, treated with respect. That it was a fair process. That you enjoyed it. That they kept regular communication. Going back to my earlier point, where you know, if you don't hear anything at all, or if you don't hear something for 4 weeks, and you're kind of like, well, I've just sort of sent my CV into the abyss now. It's gone nowhere.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a
Well,
really interesting metric, and not one I've heard before. So I really like that.
yeah, and even to, you know, you can wait for Glassdoor, and you know, one of the features I like on Paradox is we can at different points in the process, you can send requests for feedback and have
Okay,
your
brilliant.
candidates
Yeah,
rate
yeah,
you. So,
yeah.
you know, how easy
Are you
was that
enjoying this? Is it
process
kind of as
after the
simple as the
scheduling?
smiley face type of thing? Are you know, a smiley face?
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
thumbs down. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Even easier than
Yeah.
a smiley face.
Yeah. And that's really, I mean, again, back to this, that's great feedback for if you're a smaller organization, minimally, even just like your recruiters to know, oh, there's maybe something that if I clean this up in the process, I may have even more people, less people frustrated at any point in the
Yeah.
process, more likely to come and join our job.
Yeah.
If you're a large, maybe consumer facing brand, oh my gosh, like back to this, like I want to know in real time, we back to millions of candidates at McDonald's. We want to know in real time if they're enjoying the process, if they feel the process is fair, if they feel like they've gotten their questions answered. Because again, like they are our customers, they will be our customers going forward, and um, we need to treat them as this is almost a part of their customer journey. And so that's one of the other pieces. We have this, she's the chief marketing officer of global McDonald's, and she's just brilliant and talks a lot on kind of like the customer journey. And I think we were really inspired by that within, how do you map the candidate and then employee journey, to have, really be cognizant of sort of every single touch point. Is it necessary? Like, are you adding friction or are you removing friction?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
where can it be personalized? And, are there moments to be warm and, really showcase your brand? And I think that's a neat way to be able to think about it.
Mm.
Where in a customer journey would we think it's okay to have a customer wait 48 hours for a response?
Mm.
That's not going to happen, right? It's not
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
business
Yeah.
practice. But in our candidate journeys, for some reason, that's okay.
Yeah.
Or, making a customer fill out a 30-minute form to
Yeah.
purchase something, like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I think this is where a lot of the commercial products and developments are starting to just like hopefully help all of us as
Yes.
they make their ways into our work
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's interesting because yeah, it's totally right. That why would you feel like you have to wait? And I think let's say from a candidate's perspective, the perception is that the organization maybe thinks that they're too busy, too important, or too popular, that they have too many applications, that they can't be, not that they can't be bothered, but that they don't have time to invest in sending a personalized response email to each individual person who didn't get a role, or who didn't make the shortlist, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and it's um, usually not lack of desire, right? I think you talk to the brilliant leaders in those organizations, and they say they want to. It's just how do you do that? How do you do that at scale at all of the touch points? Because it's
Yeah.
not right just after the interview, oh, they didn't get it, which
Yeah.
is critical. But also just like that, answering the questions throughout. And I think that was a bit of this like epiphany for me, and even like the career switch was like there was finally this some of these technologies that were truly like next gen, like generation
Mm.
skips that allowed for you to help businesses, like actually help business results, but then scale almost like white glove, personalized, warm, inclusive experiences.
Mm.
To scale that, until automation, you weren't able to really scale that in a warm, personalized way. And I think maybe before meeting Paradox, I kind of always thought of it as just a way to scale one size fits all. And now with how smart technology is, it's like, oh no, you can actually scale personalized experiences,
Yeah.
and make, this is maybe the paradox of it, but like make it more human, at the end of the day, because it's not particularly human or caring, right, for us to leave candidates with no response ever,
Yeah.
or ghost them
Ghosting.
or
Yeah.
leave them hanging and waiting.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So
Yeah.
like it does warm up the experience in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. Josh, is there anything else that you wanted to add in relation to Paradox, or any additional thoughts around talent or talent management before we start wrapping things up?
Yeah, if you're in a world where you have recruiters or you get to work with a recruiter, yeah, I just think it's kind of my pitch for them. You know, we talk a lot at work on kind of championing the champions of talent. And we just have so much respect for people who are in recruiter roles or TA roles or talent roles or HR roles. I think you find great ones and they really help you, they help your team, they help you end up being successful. I think they're motivated by the human aspects of work and finding people that can be differentiators.
Hmm.
And I think sometimes it can be an unsung hero type role. After you fill the job, you're kind of on to the next one. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's maybe a shout out to the recruiters. I think they're doing some really amazing work in that role, is just continuing to evolve and be sophisticated. So if you are in recruiting or you are in talent and you're thinking about things, maybe my pitch is that I think you're in a spot where you could be the next chief people officer or CEO, because there are very few roles in an organization where you're learning technology at the pace that recruiting or talent team is learning it. You're
Hmm.
learning branding and marketing similar to a marketing team to launch
Yeah.
employment
Good
brands.
point. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're learning about all aspects of the business, and if you're doing your job really well, you actually know sort of what the differentiators of those aspects of the business
Yeah.
are. And you're designing really great processes that are checked by data, which is what we all should be learning. So you kind of get this really great full experience that I think is directly correlated to success in kind of C-suite type positions. So
Yeah.
uh, thank you if you're in one of those roles, if you're considering a career in HR, please feel free to reach out to me too. I'm reach out on LinkedIn, be happy to chat with you. But just really excited about where HR is going. I think we should all be excited about how those roles will continue to impact us as they get further and further away from like process driven or administrative,
Hmm.
because more of that stuff is being automated and allowing for some of these brilliant humans to bring really unique cultures to life and make sure
Hmm.
that we're kind of maximizing our performance.
Yeah, love that. And the question I ask everyone who comes on the podcast, Josh, is what does being happier at work mean to you?
Oh, it's such a good one to wrap it up with. Um, to me, it means like there's no lines, and I mean this in a positive way, and I think it's almost like internally of like that blend between work and not work. Now, in an
Hmm.
unhealthy way, right? Like that blend means, oh, you're always on your computer or you're always,
Yes. Yeah.
for me, it's the indication of like that transition. There's nothing in my gut
It's
that
frictionless, you might
is
say in your
making me
language.
anxious or nervous. Yeah. What was it?
Frictionless.
Yeah, yeah, frictionless, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great sign, right? Because it allows for me to say like, hey, I'm just as excited, maybe just as well, I'm really excited by this project and I'm excited about this vacation, and I know I can like balance things. Um, I always think about, boss, content, and culture, kind of in those orders, like, who do I get to work for, and am I learning? And I think just so much of that dictates your like day and that frictionless transition from personal life into to work life.
Yeah.
Content, then, right? Like, am I doing the things that like I feel like I'm uniquely good at and jazzed about? And like, there are 99 things that I can't do as well as so many other people, but it's like, if I'm in the spot where I'm like I'm doing the thing that I think I can really contribute or bring something
Mm.
special, like that gets me going. And then culture, I think, is just getting so broadly defined, but I mean, like, you find the thing for you, but I mean, ultimately being a place where people want you, like they recognize that skill set and
Mm.
treat you well and give you a lot of trust, and you you measure that back to this McDonald's example of like you measure that by how much you want to give back to it. Like you feel like your cup's full and you can now give to others within that environment, and I think that's
Mm.
such like a healthy healthy sign. So
Yeah.
you're kind of getting it on all fronts. But yeah.
That's a lovely way to describe it, though. Yeah, like the boss content and culture. Yeah, no, definitely would love to drill into that a little bit more. Um, at another time, just given the time that we're at now. Now, if people want to reach out to you, or if they want to understand a bit more about what Paradox does, what's the best way they can do that?
Yep. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. So Joshua Secrest, and Secrest is Secrest. And be happy to chat with you there, or joshua.secrest@paradox.ai.
Brilliant. That's great. Thank you so much for your time today. I loved our chat. I'm sure we could have gone on for another little while talking about all things automation and, the fact that the robots are not taking over the world. But thank you. Really, really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much.